It's important to recognize that every leader is going to have strengths, every leader is going to have weaknesses, every leader is going to have successes, and every leader is going to have failings. And oftentimes what I find my students doing, what I myself often do, is I compare myself to other people when they are sprinting and I feel inadequate. And I discount the moments when they are stumbling because I think, well, and I discount that. And I feel somehow inadequate compared to them. So I want to tell you about my first job. The way this story is going to end is I get fired. So I got fired from my first job. I was a student at Fuller. I graduated from college on a Sunday and started in my internship on Tuesday. So I was brand new college graduate and I was hired to be a youth minister. I was hired for a 2-year term, and at the end of the first year they asked me, well, yeah, let's not have you come back. What happened was that I'm going to tell you the version of the story that I would tell myself, and then I'm going to tell you a version of the story that is probably a better way to tell the story. So what happened at first is I was hired and I worked for the summer because everything was great in the summer. I was able to work 40 hours a week and I was able to care for the students and all that was great. And then the way the job was constructed is then once fall started, it was supposed to go to 20 hours a week. And I went to 20 hours a week and I found it was just really hard to be a youth minister while being a student. And so finally what I did is I looked at the job description they'd given me and I added up all the time that I was supposed to be in front of a group or in a staff meeting or something, and it added up to 19 and a half hours. So I was supposed to only work 20 hours and 19 and a half of them was supposed to be in front of a group. There'd be no preparation, no visiting students, none of the other work that was necessary. I mean, I couldn't figure out how to do this. And so I went and I talked to my boss and I said that I've done a little bit of research and I discovered that up until you hired me, that this job was a 40-hour-a-week job and that you didn't have enough money, and so what you've done is you've advertised it as a 20-hour-a-week job, but it turns out I'm supposed to be in front of a group and 19 and a half hours a week. Can we talk about how to make some sense of this, because there's no way I can do this job in 20 hours a week? And the sum total of his response was, where's your commitment, boy? What he told me was I was going to have to figure out a way to make that work. Well, over time, of course, I couldn't make it work. And at the end of that year, they fired me. They said, we'll find somebody else. That's the story that I told myself. And every bit of that story is true. There are no facts in that story that are untrue. All of that is accurate, but it turns out that it's not truthful. That's not why I was fired. The reason I was fired is that I was, well, a lousy youth minister. You see, I was somebody who was used to getting stuff done. I was somebody who started out as an engineer. When I graduated as an engineering major, and so I was really good at solving problems. And so I treated the young people that were entrusted to my care as problems to be solved. And it turns out they weren't problems, they were human beings. And I was particularly bad at dealing with young people's emotions. So I remember at one point a 15-year-old came to me and was talking about how the only boyfriend she'd ever had just broken up with her. Very first boyfriend, broken up with her. And what did I do? I somehow treated that like a problem to be solved and tried to figure out how she could make sure that next time they didn't break up with her. I don't even remember what I did. It was really cringeworthy. It was that bad. It's not very hard to know what a 15-year-old needs in that moment. They need emotional support. And I gave her everything but emotional support. I tried to solve her problem for her. I was really bad at dealing with people's emotions. I got fired from my first job for that reason. As a matter of fact, as I was getting fired from that job, the pastor went to my wife and said, whatever you do, don't let this guy become a minister. He would be dangerous. Now, I tell that story on the one hand because it's important for you to know that people fail, and it's important to talk about their failings. But it's also important to know, what did I do next? On the one hand, I hid from it. I tried to tell everybody I got fired because of the 19 and a half hours thing. And every bit of that was true, and it was irrelevant. The reason I got fired, I was bad at emotions. And so one of the things that I figured out is I was going to have to get better at emotions, because it turns out that every single human being that I was encountering had these emotions thing. And I was going to have to figure out how to deal with them. And so one of the things that I knew, I was a student here at Fuller, and I said, I know we have a psych school, and I know that the psych school offers 10 hours of counseling a week, or 10 hours of free counseling if you can go once a week for 10 weeks. And I figured, I learned calculus in 10 weeks. How hard can emotions be? And so I went and I said, sign me up for 10 weeks, and I'll do my 10 weeks, and at the end of it, I will have learned emotions just the way that I learned calculus. Well, 3 years of counseling later, I was in counseling the entire time I was at Fuller. And why is that? Because I learned more in those counseling sessions than I did in any single class at Fuller. I had more to learn. I had to recognize that I was going to have to establish what we're going to in this class call threshold competencies. I was never going to be the person who was the very best at dealing with other people's emotions, but I had to get good enough. And I had to get good enough that I could function and do a good job when somebody's emotions were in play. So that if I had it to do over again and the 15-year-old came to me, I would know that this isn't a time for me to deal with people's emotions, and I would know how to do that well. I got fired for my first job, not for the reason I told people, but because I was bad at emotions. And that the most important part of that story is not just that I got fired, but how I responded to it. I had to find a way to embrace my weakness. I can't tell you that I'm just world's greatest guy at emotions now, but at least I have threshold competencies.